So picture this. It is 1953, and the absolute most powerful men in Washington, D.C. have essentially summoned the most beloved woman in America to answer for a crime.
Right, a crime that was literally ruining careers overnight at that point.
Exactly. I mean, we are talking about Lucille Ball, the undisputed queen of television. And she had just been publicly accused of being a communist.
During the absolute peak of the Red Scare, no less.
Yeah, the timing couldn't have been worse. And by every conceivable metric of 1950s Hollywood, her career, I mean, it should have been instantaneously incinerated, right?
Oh, absolutely. The network should have dropped her on the spot.
The sponsors should have fled. She should have just vanished into historical obscurity.
But she didn't.
No, she didn't. Instead, she walked away from that entire firestorm, not just completely unscathed, but on a trajectory to eventually own and run an entire television studio.
Which is just unheard of.
It's wild. And today, we are opening up a stack of sources that suggest her incredible survival and, the massive empire she built. Well, it wasn't just a fluke of public relations.
No, the sources argue it was a mathematical certainty, something written directly into her cosmic blueprints.
Which completely upends the way we traditionally view historical icons.
It really does. I mean, we are so accustomed to this comforting sort of binary narrative of the celebrity.
Right. You look at the clown makeup or the physical comedy.
Yeah, the legendary scatterbrained housewife getting her head stuck in a loving cup, and we think we understand the person.
But when you actually step behind the facade of Lucy Ricardo, you encounter a historical reality that is just profoundly staggering.
The cognitive dissonance is intense.
It really is. Because the public perception of this lovable, clumsy redhead who couldn't balance a checkbook is light years away from the reality of who Lucille Ball actually was.
He was a ruthless perfectionist, a survivor of devastating childhood trauma.
And ultimately, the very first woman to run a major Hollywood studio. I mean, she was personally greenlighting franchises like Star Trek and Mission.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive for you listening today. We are going to map the hidden architecture of her life.
But we aren't just relying on standard biographies, are we?
No, not at all. We are bypassing the standard Hollywood lore completely. We are examining her life through the highly specific lens of her NeoHermetic astrology chart.
Which is fascinating.
We're using it as a diagnostic tool, really, to understand the exact mechanics of how she engineered her reality.
Okay, so let's unpack this right out of the gate. Because if you are new to NeoHermetic philosophy, and I definitely had to wrap my head around this while going through the research, we are not talking about pop astrology here.
Definitely not.
It's not the stuff you glance at in the back of a magazine while you're waiting in the checkout line. It's not a vague daily horoscope.
Far from it. Neo-Hermeticism views the birth chart as a soul contract.
The soul contract.
Right. It approaches the positions of the cosmos at the moment of your birth, not as this loose psychological profile, but as an ancient, highly complex architectural schematic.
But it's more like engineering.
Exactly. It is the legal fine print, if you will, that a soul agrees to before incarnating into the physical world.
Wow.
It dictates the constraints, the raw materials, and the specific karmic obligations of that particular lifetime.
It's the difference between taking a nice photograph of the outside of a skyscraper versus unrolling the actual structural blueprints on a table.
That's a perfect analogy.
Because the photograph just shows you the shiny glass windows, but the blueprint shows you the load-bearing walls, the electrical grid.
It shows you exactly where the stress fractures are going to happen if there's an earthquake.
Right. So what we're asking today is, are the sources actually arguing that her life, all the pratfalls, the massive success, the brutal setbacks, wasn't just a series of lucky breaks and random tragedies?
They are arguing exactly that.
That it was an engineered corporate spiritual master plan.
Yes. In this framework, the events of her life were the dynamic execution of a highly specific, deeply complex contract.
That is just, it's so wild to think about.
But to truly decode that cosmic blueprint, we first have to examine the physical building it produced, right?
We have to establish the stakes.
We have to look at the biographical landscape, the mortal experience she actually lived through to understand what required such an intense architectural design in the first place.
And for you, the listener, understanding what actually happened in her early life is absolutely crucial. Because the foundation of her story, it cracks almost immediately.
It does.
She was born on August 6, 1911. And by February 1915, when she is barely 3 years old, her father, Henry Ball, dies suddenly of typhoid fever.
That sudden catastrophic loss is the primary wound.
It's devastating.
It instantly plunges her mother into this state of pregnant, struggling widowhood, and it thrusts this toddler into an environment of deep instability.
She's shifted between relatives, right?
Yes. The fundamental security of the home is shattered before she even has the vocabulary to process what's happening.
Yeah, and the hits just keep coming.
Yeah.
If we fast forward to 1927, there is a horrific, frankly bizarre shotgun accident at her house.
A terrible tragedy.
A neighborhood boy is accidentally paralyzed by a gun her grandfather had bought for her brother, and the resulting legal judgments completely bankrupt the family.
They lost everything.
Their home is literally sold at public auction in 1928, and the family is just dispersed.
So you have a child who loses her father, loses her financial security, and then physically loses the roof over her head.
Reading through this, it seems incredibly clear that this trauma created a lifelong, almost cellular need for absolute control.
You're touching on the core psychological engine of her early survival right there.
Yeah.
But what the NeoHermetic framework asks us to consider is how that need for control actually materialized. Because she didn't just shrink into a protective shell.
No, she weaponized it.
Exactly. At 15, she goes to New York City to study acting at the prestigious John Murray Anderson School.
And her teachers, who are evaluating this desperate, awkward teenager, they bluntly tell her she has zero future in the theater.
They literally tell her mother to save her money and take her home.
Which she ultimately does, but not because she gave up. And 17, she is struck by a devastating illness.
Right. Historians debate whether it was severe rheumatoid arthritis or rheumatic fever.
But the result is that she is in agonizing constant pain. She cannot walk for 2 years.
It's hard to even imagine.
Medical professionals are telling her she might never live a normal life, let alone dance or act.
And her response to that is to spend months forcing herself through excruciating, punishing physical exercises just to regain the mechanical use of her own legs.
If we look at that period of isolation and physical agony, we really start to see the forge where the absolute steel of her comedic persona was manufactured.
That's a great way to put it.
When millions of viewers later watched her taking those wild, violent, seemingly effortless falls on television, they were looking at a woman who had fought a literal trench war against her own nervous system.
Just to be able to stand upright.
Exactly. She learned to treat her physical form not as a delicate, precious sanctuary, but as a piece of heavy machinery.
And her grit is just unbelievable. She eventually grinds her way out of New York and into Hollywood, but it is not a fairy tale rise to the top.
Not at all. She spends years as the queen of the bees.
Right. She's getting steady work, sure, but she's a workhorse. She's doing the grueling, unglamorous studio pictures, never securing the top billing of a true star.
And then in 1940, she meets and marries the Cuban bandleader, Desi.
A union that introduced an entirely new layer of intense instability into her life.
Because the marriage was deeply fractured, almost from its inception.
Right, it was. He was a traveling musician, constantly touring with his orchestra.
And the physical distance was agonizing for her.
Exacerbated by his habitual infidelities. And on top of all this, she suffered multiple heartbreaking miscarriages.
Which, if you consider this from the perspective of her childhood wound, for a woman whose defining early trauma was the sudden loss of her father and the forced auctioning of her childhood home, this domestic chaos must have been psychologically intolerable.
It was completely intolerable. And here's where it gets really interesting, and where the standard Hollywood narrative completely flips.
Right, the creation of I Love Lucy in 1951.
We always assume it was born out of this grand, joyful, artistic ambition to be the funniest woman on the planet.
But according to the sources, it was fundamentally a defensive maneuver.
Entirely defensive.
It was a calculated, almost desperate corporate strategy to keep her husband off the road and force a stable domestic life.
She essentially cornered the network. She demanded they cast him as her husband just so they could stay in Hollywood under the same roof.
She took the deepest personal trauma of her life, the threat of domestic abandonment, and synthesized it into a revolutionary business model.
And when the network executives inevitably pushed back, claiming the American public wouldn't buy a red-blooded American woman married to a Cuban man with a thick accent, her response was to go around them.
She and Desi formed their own company, Desilu Productions.
Furthermore, she completely rejected the industry standard of broadcasting live and recording on cheap, degraded kinescope.
She demanded high-quality 35mm film.
She demanded a 3-camera setup to capture the action in front of a live audience.
And the studio executives hated this. I mean, it was obscenely expensive.
They fought her on it.
The only way it got done was because she and Desi agreed to take a massive pay cut in exchange for full ownership of the physical film stock themselves.
A concession that the executives thought was a huge victory.
Right.
They completely failed to realize she was outmaneuvering them on a generational scale.
Because by insisting on high-quality film and retaining the rights, she effectively invented the television rerun.
She birthed the entire syndication model that would go on to generate billions of dollars in revenue.
It's incredible. She was never just a comedian. She was an industrial visionary.
Even when she faced the terrifying government inquisitions of 1953, she didn't just survive, she solidified her power.
And she and Desi eventually divorced in 1960.
Yes, and by 1962, she assumes a massive financial risk to buy out his shares entirely. She becomes the undisputed head of Desilu Productions.
Which is just the ultimate delicious irony of 20th century pop culture.
It really is.
She achieved absolute god-tier global fame playing a scatterbrained housewife who spent every episode desperately trying and failing to break into show business.
While in reality, the moment the director yelled cut, she walked into the boardroom as the CEO secretly running the entire television industry.
She was the boss.
It is a brilliant, almost impossibly perfect paradox, and this is precisely where the source material transitions from history to geometry.
Okay, let's get into the geometry.
How did a girl from upstate New York with zero connections who lost her home and couldn't walk for 2 years construct an empire of this magnitude?
To answer that, the NeoHermetic framework introduces the foundational concept of the chariot.
Yes. The chariot.
Okay, for those listening who might be students new to Neo-Hermetic philosophy, how should we visualize this? We aren't looking at a circular pie chart of star signs, right?
No. That's a helpful way to approach it, actually. You want to discard the pie chart image. The framework draws heavily on classical allegories, particularly from Plato. So imagine the birth chart as an actual vehicle. A chariot.
Got it.
The ascendant, which is the zodiac sign rising on the eastern horizon at the exact minute of your birth, is the charioteer.
So the driver.
Exactly. It is the guiding consciousness, the driver of the vehicle. It represents your core identity, your physical vitality, and the lens through which you steer through reality.
And Lucille Ball's ascendant, her charioteer, is in the sign of Capricorn.
Correct.
And Capricorn, if I'm remembering the source mechanics correctly, is managed by Saturn,
Yes, that or
the planet associated with rules, restriction, time, and grueling hard work.
Precisely. Saturn is the ultimate taskmaster, the architect of boundaries.
So her charioteer is not some whimsical, free-spirited driver coasting on good vibes.
Definitely not. Her charioteer is a stoic, fiercely disciplined, highly ambitious executive. Capricorn is an earth sign, which means it is fundamentally concerned with material reality. It treats the physical world, including the flesh of the body and the turbulence of emotions, as raw materials, as tools.
She was not a driver who sought comfort. She sought structural integrity above all else.
Her identity was forged in the freezing cold reality of absolute necessity.
Which perfectly maps to a childhood where she lost everything and had to literally rebuild the mechanical ability of her own legs.
It's a one-to-one correlation.
The Saturnian driver makes total sense. But a chariot is useless without horses, right? It needs an engine to pull it.
It requires a propulsion system, yes. In Neo-Hermeticism, the primary engine consists of the inner yoke horses.
And these are calculated mathematical points.
Yes, known as the lot of spirit and the lot of fortune. These points represent the fundamental ongoing tension between your internal willpower and your external material reality.
Let's begin with the light horse then. The lot of spirit.
The will.
The will, right.
Yes. The lot of spirit represents conscious intention, your raw ambition, and the chosen actions of your intellect. It's the part of you that says, I want to achieve this.
And Lucille Ball's lot of spirit is located in the sign of Leo.
Leo is the archetype of the sovereign, the king, the radiant center stage performer.
So she naturally possessed the drive of a superstar. She wanted to shine. She wanted the crown.
Her will was absolutely sovereign and radiant, yes. However, and this is where the Neo-Hermetic blueprint reveals the specific constraints of her contract in her chart, this lot of spirit in Leo falls into the 8th place, or the 8th house.
Good. What does the 8th place mean?
In ancient astrological traditions, the 8th place is the house of abnegation, of sacrifice, of the submersion of the self into the collective or into the void.
Wait, hold on. So she has the burning will and ambition of a queen, but The blueprint locks that ambition in the basement of sacrifice.
Yes.
How does someone even function with that contradiction?
It is a profound structural friction that she had to solve to unlock her potential. It meant that to actually utilize her radiant leonine will, she was required to sacrifice her personal ego.
Oh,
She couldn't just be the glamorous, beautiful, untouchable movie star, which, by the way, she absolutely was in the 1940s when she was modeling and doing early films.
he was stunning.
But to achieve her true sovereign power, the contract demanded she become the messy, undignified, clumsy clown for the benefit of the collective ensemble.
She had to abdicate her vanity to serve the structural integrity of the show.
Exactly.
That reframes everything she ever said about her own talent. She famously claimed she wasn't actually a naturally funny person. She was just a brave actress who wasn't afraid to look incredibly stupid.
Which is the ultimate Leo in the eighth house statement.
She literally sacrificed the glamorous identity of Lucille Ball to give the world the chaotic energy of Lucy Ricardo. It was a required transaction.
It was the only way the engine would fire.
Okay, so if the light horse is the will and sacrifice, what about the dark horse, the lot of fortune?
The lot of fortune represents your material reality. It is your physical circumstances, the heavy, enduring machinery of your life, and the resources that seem to manifest by chance or fate.
And for Lucille Ball, the lot of fortune is placed in the sign of Taurus.
Another earth sign. Fixed, heavy, stubborn, sensual.
The ultimate builder and consolidator of the zodiac, right?
Yes. This placement dictates that her material wealth was never going to come from fleeting mercantile luck, gambling, or abstract intellectual property.
It was going to be derived from compound interest.
It was the physical, heavy ownership of actual sound stages, vast tracts of real estate, and literal physical miles of 35mm film stock.
Her fortune was grounded in the heaviest, most enduring material reality possible.
But there is a very specific nuance here.
Right, I understand the earth sign logic there.
Yep.
But I have to be honest, as a skeptic reading through the sources, this is where I almost laughed out loud.
The Sabian symbol.
Yes. In NeoHermetic astrology, there is this concept called Sabian symbols, where every single one of the 360 degrees of the zodiac has a highly specific poetic image attached to it.
Correct.
And the Sabian symbol for her exact degree of the lot of fortune, the anchor of her material wealth, is literally, and I quote from the text, a Spanish gallant serenading his beloved.
It is an almost aggressively literal manifestation of the symbol.
I mean, are the sources seriously arguing that the universe literally tied her massive historic bank account to Desi Arnaz playing the conga drums in her living room?
Yes.
Is neo-hermeticism always this on the nose, or is this some kind of wild anomaly?
Well, Sabian symbols are often metaphorical, but the sources highlight this specific placement because of its profound historical literalism.
It's just so exact.
Her fortune, her unprecedented material expansion, was fundamentally, structurally dependent on the energy of that Spaniard and the dynamic of courtship.
She didn't unlock her immense wealth through solitary, isolated labor.
No, she unlocked it through the formalized, hyperpublic performance of her romance with Desi Arnaz.
The entire commercial engine of Desilu Productions was built from the ground up on broadcasting that specific serenade to millions of people every week.
It's undeniable when you look at the chart.
It's like the blueprint explicitly stated, your gold mine is locked behind a door, and the only key is a Cuban band leader's guitar. That is just wild to think about.
It's the architecture of her life.
Okay, so we have a clear picture of the inner yoke. We have the Saturnian driver in Capricorn demanding control.
The spirit horse in Leo demanding she sacrifice her vanity for the crown.
And the fortune horse in Taurus generating wealth through the public serenade. But the chariot isn't complete, is it?
No. The sources move on to what they call the outer trace horses.
Yes.
While spirit and fortune explain the mechanics of her daily grind and material accumulation, the overarching legacy and the deepest, most hidden internal tensions of her life are governed by the outer trace horses.
Which are the lot of divine arrows and the lot of divine necessity.
You can think of these as the ultimate boundaries of the soul's journey. They represent the war between what you deeply, privately desire versus what you are karmically, unavoidably obligated to do for the collective.
Let's start with divine arrows, desire. The source text refers to this as the lot of basis. Where is her desire located in the blueprint?
Her divine Eros is located at 14 degrees of Pisces.
Pisces is a mutable water sign, right?
Yes, known for being deeply sensitive, highly imaginative, permeable, and intensely vulnerable.
And the Sabian symbol for this specific crucial degree of her desire is a lady in fox fur.
A lady in fox fur.
Okay, how do we interpret that in the context of what she actually wanted out of life?
We have to look at the dual nature of the symbol. The fox represents shrewdness, high intelligence, and a distinctly cunning survival instinct.
And the fur.
The fur represents insulation, luxury, and a thick, protective layer against the elements.
Okay, I see where this is going.
It tells us that beneath the ambition, her deepest, most private spiritual hunger wasn't simply for fame or money. Her eros desired to construct an invincible social armor.
She wanted a persona built of beauty and foxy shrewdness that could completely protect her profoundly sensitive, vulnerable Piscean core.
To shield her from the freezing cold of her early life.
The sudden poverty, the trauma of her father vanishing, the agonizing physical pain of her arthritis.
That is the psychological through line. She used the fur of her Hollywood glamour, her immense wealth, and her razor-sharp wit to surround herself with an impenetrable barrier so she could never be rendered helpless again.
Her highest creative joy, her eros, was found in building a mask so complete and luxurious that it acted as a fortress against the unpredictable storms of reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so if her ultimate desire is to retreat behind this shrewd protective armor, what is her divine necessity? What is the heavy karmic burden she is forced to carry outside of that fortress?
Her divine necessity, also known as the Lot of Aether, is located at 20 degrees of Libra. Crucially, this is positioned high up in her 10th place, which is the sector of the chart governing career, public reputation, and authority.
And Libra is a sign of the scales. It's about balance, formalized partnerships, the law, and social justice.
Yes. And the Sabian symbol for her karmic burden is incredibly striking. A Jewish rabbi performing his duties.
A Jewish rabbi. Okay, I definitely did not see that coming for Lucille Ball.
Most people don't.
How on earth does a rabbi connect to the queen of slapstick comedy?
It perfectly articulates her unavoidable public duty. Think about the function of a rabbi in a community.
Okay.
A rabbi is an arbiter of tradition, a teacher, a scholar of the law, and the keeper of the orthodox rules that bind the community together.
Right.
The universe essentially drafted Lucille Ball to serve exactly that function for the nascent television industry.
Oh, wow.
She wasn't allowed to just be a frivolous, wealthy entertainer hiding in her fox fur. Her necessity demanded she step out and become the high priestess of quality control.
She was forced by destiny to establish the orthodox liturgy of a brand new medium.
The three-camera system.
The live studio audience, the insistence on high-grade film over cheap kinescope.
Precisely. Those weren't merely shrewd business choices. They became the actual laws of television production.
And she was the one who had to write them, defend them, and uphold them.
Often waging brutal fights against boards of all-male network directors who were constantly trying to cut corners and violate the integrity of the work.
So let's look at this structural tension, because this is where the blueprint usually breaks a person.
It is a massive friction point.
We have Eros pulling her toward this protective, shrewd, insulated glamour in Pisces. And we have necessity dragging her out into the public square, forcing her to carry the heavy, orthodox burden of industry leadership in Libra.
Yes.
Usually, your deepest, most private desires and your heaviest public responsibilities are at war with each other. It's what causes burnout. It tears people apart. How did her chariot not rip itself in half?
You're identifying the exact friction that defines most lives. And it leads us to the single biggest reveal in her entire NeoHermetic chart.
I am so ready for this.
In this specific astrological system, every section of the zodiac is managed by a governing planet known as a term negotiator.
The sources explain this with a great theater analogy.
Yes, the stage manager.
Right. If the zodiac sign is the stage the play is happening on, the term negotiator is the stage manager standing in the wings, handing the actor their specific constraints, their props, and giving them their blocking.
It's an excellent analogy. The term negotiator dictates the fine print of how a specific energy is actually allowed to operate in the physical world.
Okay.
And for Lucille Ball, both her divine Eros in Pisces and her divine necessity in Libra share the exact same term, negotiator.
Wait, are you saying the chart has the same planet managing both the desire to hide in the fur coat and the duty to be the rabbi of the industry?
I am.
Who is the stage manager?
Jupiter.
The planet of massive, undeniable expansion, largesse, optimism, and scaling up.
My mind is officially blown. So what does that actually mean for the mechanics of her life? It means that the fundamental war that destroys most people, the agonizing friction between what they passionately want to do and what they are karmically burdened to do, was structurally removed from her operating system.
Because they shared the same manager.
Because both vectors were managed by Jupiter, they didn't pull her apart. They worked in a state of perfectly scaled tandem.
Wow.
When fate handed her a crushing restriction, a heavy burden from her necessity, Jupiter's mandate was not to shrink, compromise, or hide. Jupiter's mandate was to expand the container.
To make the stage bigger than the problem.
Exactly. Let's look at the history. When her marriage was failing, which was a massive, agonizing emotional constraint, Jupiter didn't tell her to quietly divorce and retreat into her Piscean armor.
No, Jupiter said, take the marriage, put it on 3 cameras, and broadcast it to 50 million people.
Exactly. And later, when her husband wanted to sell his share of the company, a terrifying threat to her financial security, Jupiter didn't say, just take your half of the cash and walk away.
Jupiter said, assume the debt, buy the entire studio, and become the undisputed authority.
Her desires fueled her obligations, and her obligations gave massive structure to her desires.
Because they were both managed by the principle of expansion, every single obstacle she ever faced became the exact raw material she needed to build her empire.
That is the magic of the term negotiator in her chart.
That is just its architectural perfection. The blueprint of her soul literally forced her to build Desilu.
It did.
Okay, we have the theory. We see the chariot, the engine, the tension, and the Jupiter resolution. But what makes this deep dive so compelling is that the sources don't just leave it at the theoretical level.
No, they apply it directly to the timeline.
They track this cosmic contract dynamically through the actual events of her life. They argue that these NeoHermetic principles were the literal triggers for historical events. Let's walk through this chronological manifestation.
We can trace this evolution narratively. It begins, of course, with the mechanism of the early wound, the period of her life defined by intense loss and the desperate forging of her armor.
Right, going back to the death of her father and her grueling, physically punishing early career.
In the NeoHermetic toolkit, there's a very specific technique called antitia.
Antitia.
It involves looking at planets that mirror each other across the solstitial axis of the chart. When planets are in antitia, they are in a deep, often subconscious, shadow entanglement. They hear each other.
Okay.
Lucille Ball's chart features an incredibly powerful antitia between her sun, which represents her core vitality and conscious identity, and Saturn.
The planet of limitation, time, and structure.
Yes, which also happens to be the manager of her ascendant.
So her core identity is staring into a mirror and seeing the grim reaper of structure and restriction looking back at her.
It is the defining astrological signature of early profound loss. It is the blueprint of a child who is forcefully stripped of innocence and thrust into an unnatural, crushing level of adult responsibility.
The sudden death of her father when she was 3 years old activated this Saturnian weight.
Forcing her son, her life force, to immediately abandon the frivolity of childhood and focus entirely on endurance and survival.
Which perfectly explains why she could push through the agonizing pain of her physical illnesses.
And why she could endure that long, slow grind in B-movies without quitting.
And the sources point to her Mars placement to explain her specific brand of physical endurance, right?
Yeah.
Because Mars is the planet of action, kinetic energy, and drive.
Yes.
But hers is in Taurus, which is slow, heavy, and stubborn.
It is. But again, we have to look at the fine print, the term negotiators. Her Mars in Taurus is governed by a Venusian messenger.
Venus is the planet of art, beauty, aesthetics, and meticulous choreography.
Right. There's a line in the research that I absolutely loved.
Oh, I know the one. She treated pratfalls like ballistic equations.
It's an incredibly accurate description. The Venusian messenger demanded that the violent, chaotic, kinetic energy of Mars, the slipping on grapes, the falling over couches, the getting hit in the face with a pie, could not just be spontaneous, sloppy chaos.
It had to be choreographed into a perfect aesthetic dance.
The Sabian symbol for her specific Mars degree is a man with a silk hat, muffled against the cold, braves a storm.
The silk hat. It's so specific.
The silk hat represents the armor of the high-end professional. It represents premium production values.
She didn't dodge the chaotic storm of physical comedy. She muffled herself against it through relentless, punishing, microscopic rehearsal until the mechanical execution of the gag was completely insulated against failure.
She forced the violence of Mars to submit to the beauty of Venus.
Okay, so that perfectly sets the stage for what happens in 1950 and 1951 when the entire trajectory of television is altered.
The birth of I Love Lucy.
And the chart shows us as a massive collision.
It is an explosive alignment. We have to look at the planet Uranus.
Uranus.
In NeoHermeticism, Uranus governs sudden awakenings, technological disruption, and rebellion against the status quo. In her chart, Uranus is sitting right in her first place, the house of her identity.
Okay.
And it is forming a square aspect to her 10th place of career and authority.
Can you break down what a square feels like in reality? Because earlier you said it was a hostile relationship. So a square is like two cars arriving at an intersection at the exact same time, and neither one is willing to yield.
That is an excellent analogy. A square is a 90-degree angle of intense friction. It demands a crisis to resolve the tension.
So her personal identity, Uranus in the first, is literally arriving at the intersection at the exact same time as the career establishment, the 10th place, and neither will yield.
We see this play out historically when the CBS executives, the ultimate 10th place authority, flatly refused to cast Desi Arnaz.
They demanded she yield. They said the American public would never accept it.
But she doesn't yield. She hits the gas. She issues the ultimate disruptive ultimatum. I don't do the show without my husband.
Hey, here's the genius of the blueprint.
Yes.
While Uranus is squaring her career, causing this massive crisis, it is simultaneously forming a trine aspect to Venus.
A trine is the opposite of a square, right? It's like hitting the on-ramp and merging perfectly into highway traffic without even tapping the brakes.
Exactly. A trine is a 120-degree angle of harmonious, uninterrupted flow.
So the massive disruption of the industry standard, the Iranian shock to the CBS executives, flowed directly and effortlessly into Venus, the planet of preservation and beauty.
Her rebellion didn't destroy her career. It resulted directly in the permanent, pristine, aesthetic preservation of 35-millimeter film syndication.
The friction of the square generated the energy required to fuel the perfection of the trine.
It's like watching a master watchmaker lock a series of impossible gears into place. Everything serves a purpose.
It does.
But then we hit 1953, the Red Scare Inquisition. This is arguably the most terrifying, high-stakes moment of her entire career.
It was a moment of absolute existential threat. And to be clear, as we unpack the astrology of this moment, we are looking strictly at the objective historical lines and how they correlate to her chart.
Right. We are not endorsing or analyzing the political ideologies involved.
No. The historical context is that in 1936, in an effort to appease her eccentric, beloved grandfather, Lucille Ball registered to vote as a member of the Communist Party.
Which, by all accounts, she didn't think much of at the time. It was a family favor to a man she adored.
But cut to 1953, during the height of Senator Joseph McCarthy's HUAC investigations, and that voter registration surfaces.
The environment is pure paranoia. People are being blacklisted for far less. Entire careers, livelihoods, and reputations are being incinerated overnight.
And suddenly, Walter Winchell, one of the most powerful broadcasters in the country, announces on the radio that the most popular television star in America is tied to the Communist Party.
The astrological mapping of this crisis is chillingly precise. If we go back and look at her lot of spirit, her radiant, Leonine drive, the Sabian symbol for that exact mathematical degree, is a communist activist spreading his revolutionary ideals.
I mean, the hairs on my arms are standing up. You cannot script that.
The literalism is intense. But remember, the lot of spirit represents her conscious drive and intention. Her revolutionary ideals were entirely industrial, not political.
She sought to completely overthrow the capitalist studio system's way of doing things, to own her own labor, to invent the rerun.
But the blueprint demanded that this symbol literalize as a terrifying shadow from her past.
So how does the chariot survive a direct missile strike like that?
We have to look to the eclipses.
Right.
In NeoHermetic astrology, eclipses are not just astronomical events. They are supreme, chaotic thresholds of transformation. They act as massive cosmic triggers for the underlying contract.
In the late summer of 1953, right as this crisis hit its apex, there was a profound alignment known as the eclipse of the Lion's Gate.
It featured a total lunar eclipse operating in direct opposition to a solar eclipse.
Okay, we need to slow down and unpack the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Why is a lunar eclipse opposite a solar eclipse so volatile?
The sun represents authority, the core identity, and in this context, the blinding heat of the government investigation. The moon represents the public, the collective emotional vessel, and the protective instinct of the family.
During this specific eclipse sequence, they were engaged in what NeoHermeticism calls a mutual reception of light.
They were essentially swapping roles and resources.
The harsh, interrogating authority of the sun was suddenly softened and filtered through the protective, mothering affection of the moon.
It's like two opposing armies deciding to swap their top hostage negotiators. So what were the Sabian symbols for this massive eclipse?
The solar position of the eclipse was inextricably tied to her lot of spirit.
But the lunar position, sitting at 4 degrees of Aquarius and directly opposing the threat, carried the symbol. A man formally dressed showcases trophies.
Desi. It has to be Desi.
It was Desi or not. Before a live studio audience, formally dressed in his immaculate suit, he stepped out before the cameras rolled and addressed the scandal head-on.
He told the crowd, the only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that is not legitimate.
He used his supreme showmanship, his humor, to literally showcase her to the public. He was essentially saying, look at this beloved American icon. She is our trophy. She is fiercely loyal. She is harmless.
And the public, represented by the deep emotional reservoir of that lunar eclipse, didn't act as a judge or an executioner. They acted as a fiercely protective mother.
They erupted in cheers.
The eclipse forced the darkest secret into the absolute blinding light of the public square, and through the direct intervention of her partner, the career-ending threat was transmuted into a massive, undeniable validation of her power.
The investigation was dropped.
It is just a staggering display of turning a structural weakness into an impenetrable fortress.
Which perfectly bridges us to the ultimate evolution of her power in 1962. She survives the Inquisition. She's shielded by the public.
But there's a massive structural problem left in this chariot.
Her entire material wealth, that Torres Spanish serenade engine we discussed, was fundamentally built on the architecture of her marriage.
So what happens to the cosmic blueprint when the marriage itself finally collapses and they divorce in 1960?
It requires a definitive structural pivot, and the cosmos provided one on July 31st, 1962, in the form of a total solar eclipse.
But this wasn't just any eclipse. This specific event fell within a single arc minute, which is an incredibly rare, hyper-exact mathematical alignment of her natal lot of spirit in Leo.
The sign of the sovereign, the absolute king.
Exactly. A total solar eclipse sitting on the precise microscopic coordinate of her conscious will and soul purpose.
This celestial gateway acted as an incinerator.
It burned away the old, decayed partnership, it severed the shared marital history of Desilu, and it crowned her as the sole, singular, undisputed executive.
It provided the massive energetic surge required for her to assume millions of dollars in debt and buy out Desi's shares completely.
And please tell me the Sabian symbol for this degree is as wild as the others.
The symbol for that exact degree of Leo where the eclipse crowned her is a bareback rider in a circus performing a dangerous stunt.
Unbelievable.
It captures the sheer breathtaking audacity of the buyout perfectly. She was performing a solo act without a safety net, taking on the staggering financial debt of 33 sound stages at a time when the entire industry was deeply, inherently skeptical that a woman could run a studio.
But because the eclipse hit her lot of spirit with such mathematical perfection, the stunt wasn't an act of desperation.
It was the pure, essential expression of her soul's purpose to lead. She executed the dangerous stunt flawlessly, and the industry had no choice but to bow to her.
Which ushers in a decades-long reign as the absolute queen of television, not just in front of the cameras, but dominating the boardroom. She was untouchable.
And that brings us to the final sequence, the final curtain and eternal legacy. We are looking at 1989.
Lucille Ball passed away on April 26, 1989, and leading up to her physical departure, the cosmos provided a final, beautiful sequence of eclipses.
In early 1989, there were profound lunar and solar eclipses operating across the Virgo and Pisces axis in her chart.
The axis that holds her Mercury, her Venus, and her divine arrows, her deep desire for protection.
Yes. The lunar eclipse in late February hit exactly at 3 degrees of Virgo. And the Sabian symbol for that degree is 2 guardian angels.
Oh, wow. That is a stunning image.
It is the ultimate signal of withdrawal from the physical world. It suggests that her meticulous, exhausting, lifelong management of her image and her empire was finally being surrendered to a higher protective force.
It was a graceful, permitted exit from the heavy material stage she had dominated for so long.
But the fascinating thing about NeoHermetic astrology is that death isn't the end of the chart's operation, is it?
No.
The sources go into detail about a concept called the posthumous principle. I'd love for you to explain how a blueprint outlives the building.
The NeoHermetic posthumous principle posits that the geometry of a truly profound soul contract doesn't dissolve when the physical body dies.
It continues to operate, to trigger, and to expand in the collective consciousness.
The eclipses that happen today still interact with the mathematical coordinates of her birth chart. Her lot of dharma, her spiritual vocation, continues to be energetically activated.
We see this materially in the ongoing massive expansion of the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival in her hometown, and in the permanent structural legacy of the syndication model she invented.
Her chart is still an active, functioning architecture shaping our culture today.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's zoom out and look at the whole skyline.
Looking at Lucille Ball through the lens of the NeoHermetic chariot fundamentally shatters the simplistic comic strip image we started with.
She wasn't just a funny actress who stumbled into some lucky breaks.
She was a master architect of reality.
She took the shattered, bleeding glass of her childhood trauma, her desperate, passionate desire for protective armor, and the heavy, orthodox, Libran burden of her public duty, and she synthesized them.
She utilized the precise term negotiators of her soul to turn deep personal pain into a revolutionary, enduring cultural empire.
She was the ultimate charioteer. She mastered the mechanical and spiritual laws of her existence.
In Lucille Ball's chart, we witness the absolute integration of the human experience.
Her deepest, most private desires and her unavoidable, heaviest public burdens were not allowed to destroy her, because they were both managed by the exact same planetary force.
Jupiter, the principle of expansion.
It allowed her to look at a terrifying brick wall and see a door. It allowed her to turn every single obstacle, every heartbreak, every threat she ever faced into the exact raw material required to build an empire.
Which leaves us with a pretty intense, provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up.
If you were to sit down and look at the conflicting forces in your own life right now, the things you absolutely have to do, the heavy karmic burdens weighing you down, versus the things you deeply, passionately want to do, they usually feel like they're locked in a brutal war.
They feel like they're tearing you apart.
But is it possible there is a hidden term negotiator behind the scenes of your own life, actually linking them together?
What if your greatest, most exhausting burdens are actually the exact, perfectly engineered raw materials required to build your own legacy?
It certainly changes the way you look at the obstacles in your own blueprint.
It really does.
So the next time you turn on the television and see Lucy Ricardo slipping on those grapes, just remember, you aren't watching a clown.
No.
You're watching a CEO execute a flawless ballistic equation.